So with that, I get to introduce a good friend, Casey Stevens. Casey has been a wonderful addition to Hope. He came approximately 10 years ago. He received his bachelor's degree from Central Michigan University in Family Studies, and then he received his master's degree from Grand Valley State University in higher education. He has worked at Ferris. He has worked at Calvin University, and then we stole him from Calvin to come to Hope, which is only appropriate. And he initially came as the director of the Phelps Scholars Program, and then he moved into the position of the Associate Dean of Integrative Studies. Casey is a person he loves students, and he loves students with a care and a transcendence that transforms them. I was the recipient of watching his work and was awed on how he did it with humility, but with directness and with real results. So with that, I'm going to let Casey Stevens share about first generation students and the kinds of things that he's doing with them.
Thanks, Richard. My mic is working well? Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for that kind and generous introduction. It's funny when we to speak about first generation students in just a moment, and I'll speak to kind of how we arrived at the point of our conversation where we're going. But before I do that, one of the interesting components of first generation students is we talk a lot about their experience coming into and through the institution, but we don't always talk a lot about what it looks like for them to move out of the institution. And as you might imagine, for first generation college students, often they are first generation professionals in whatever their field is, because they are the first in their family to be heading in those directions, as is intuited by the name of the title. And I don't, in my own journey as a first generation student and then college graduate, I don't think that I fully anticipated that until I arrived toward the end of my college undergrad program, and realized I had no idea what I was going to do. And I didn't know anybody to really give me much guidance on how to take those next steps until I had a really friendly conversation with one of my faculty mentors named Ed Long at Central Michigan. And then there was a little bit of a lapse period between those. And I share this story just to highlight, Richard. I was working at Calvin at the time, writing the thesis for my master's program, sitting across the street at LJ's, drinking a coffee, and I ran into a colleague of mine who worked here. And they invited me to come and tour their office. They had just started at Hope the year before, and their building was brand new, and they were pretty excited to introduce it. And I walked in, did not anticipate that I would be interacting with the vice president of student development and dean of students, Dr. Frost. So mind you, I'm in gym shorts and a very casual t-shirt and a pair of slide sandals. And I walk in and I had the chance to meet Dr. Frost. And he was so generous in the moment that I actually sent him an email follow-up, said, hey, I've really just kind of been starting out in this field, wrapping up my master's degree right now. I'm working residence life. I don't know what's next, and I don't quite know how to get there. And I'm wondering if I can just have your ear for a little while. And Richard sat with me for, I don't know, an hour and a half over lunch, and just really struck an impression. So eternally grateful for the time, right? When I think of where my career started and his role and impact on that. So thank you, not only for the kind introduction, but your own role. Okay, for my presentation today, for our talk, I want to certainly introduce the concepts of being a first generation student and understanding that and what it looks like at Hope College. But I think it's probably important for you all to know and to have a sense of why this topic is important, why it's relevant. And so we'll actually spend a little bit of time speaking about the history of higher education in the context of the United States. My reason for wanting to introduce that is because at the heart of what we're talking about is the merit, value, and importance of higher education, particularly because it has been, for the length of our country's history, one of the greatest sources of social mobility and civic well-being and social well-being. And if that is true, which I believe that it is, and there's evidence to support that it is, then nurturing access to, success in, and success moving beyond higher education, it could be argued, and I believe should be argued, is an important and crucial element of a flourishing nation, particularly of a flourishing democratic nation. And a diverse nation. So that's kind of the heart behind the presentation today. And so what I'm going to do actually, and so I'll give you a little bit of a preview of what we'll speak about today, is I want to give you a little bit of information about definitions and context. So who are first generation students? What are some of the contextual variables that help us to understand who they are, and why are the definitions important? How did we arrive where we are today, right? So first generation implies that there is a system that somebody is newly coming into. What is it about that system that has resulted in where we are, and how can we then better understand the first generation college student experience? What are some of the resources and supports that are there to help them be successful, strategies for success? And then specifically, what are we doing at Hope College? All right, so I'm thinking probably about 45 minutes that we'll be together, and that's my roadmap for being there. I really value transparency. I think probably so far you've picked up on some of my biases, philosophies, ideas that are informing my perspective. And so I just want to be upfront about those. A few things that are guiding where I'm coming from today in my conversation with you all, which, by the way, if you haven't picked up on this either, I'm very informal. I take the topic seriously. I take education seriously. I take my work seriously. I don't take myself too seriously. But I'm very hopeful that if you have questions as we're going throughout, please feel free to interject thoughts, questions as we go along. I'm very open to those. But as we have this conversation, I want you to know a little bit about who I am. So first of all, these are some of the key kind of philosophies and values that drive my work. This concept of engaged pedagogy. This was popularized by an educator and scholar from Brazil named Paulo Freire. And his belief was that education and freedom were inextricably linked. This idea has been expanded a little bit more in recent years by a scholar, educator, and writer named Bell Hooks, who's since passed away. But Bell Hooks inserted the word love into that conversation as well, that the concepts of education, justice, and love are inextricably linked. And my rationale for that is that an ethic rooted in a belief that integrity, accountability, and rigor are central to college student success, right? But also not simply for being brains on a stick, but rather to go and to live meaningful lives, which leads to this second concept of embodied learning. Embodied learning is the idea that who we are affects how we learn, and what we learn should affect how we live, right? So who we are, we bring things to the table that affects how we process the information. We, as a result of being ourselves, could help one another to learn in new and enlightened ways. But also, it should give meaning, right? We're not simply here to gather ideas and then to take them back to wherever we are in isolation, but rather in a pluralistic, diverse society, what we're learning should matter to the lives that we live and lead. The last is this idea of the liberal arts tradition. When I speak of the lives that we live and lead, I'm thinking particularly about the liberal arts tradition in the context of the United States, where we are right now, what it looks like to belong to and to participate with responsibility in a diverse democratic nation, responsibility to and for one another civically. And I believe that a core avenue to that, certainly not the only avenue, but a core avenue to that is through being intellectually alive and a critical thinker and curious and engaged responsibly as a citizen and well-rounded as well. So those are a few ideas that mean a great deal to me and that affect kind of where I'm coming from in this conversation, in this presentation. I wanted you all to be aware of those. The last is just a personal and professional obligation that I hold. I believe each of these things to be true. They inform where I'm coming from, but also I take responsibility for what it looks like to put them into practice. And then more specifically, as it relates to my work institutionally, I believe that we as leaders and employees of any college that we're working at have a responsibility to graduate the students we admit. That doesn't mean that our students don't have an onus of responsibility as well, but we have a duty to show up. If they are admitted, that implies that they have the tools and the strengths, the intelligence required to graduate, and that we need to meet them partway to be responsible in that. So that's a little bit about kind of where I'm coming from, but enough about me. I want to get thinking a little bit about what it looks like to be a first generation student. So to do that, I want to invite you all to join me just in being conscious of who these students are. Remember, I enjoy embodied learning. So let's think about ourselves as part of this picture. And I want you to think of a recent experience when you were doing something new, something that required you to learn as you went. This could be something significant, or excuse me, it could be something minor. Maybe you were preparing a new dish or a meal, right? Learning to navigate a new phone or system. Could be something a little bit more significant, perhaps supporting a loved one through illness or adapting to an unexpected life change, right? Minor or significant. And I just invite you to think about what that experience was like for you. What did you feel? What were your senses telling you? What was your physical environment? What were you feeling? What were your emotions? Maybe there was hope, gratitude, relief, curiosity, fear, excitement. Absolutely. That was my last one. I'd say it was excitement. These moments that blend uncertainty with determination can just help to be a window of empathy for us about what it's like to be a first generation college student. These moments of uncertainty matched with determination can help paint a picture for us of what it's like to be a first generation college student. Is anybody willing to share an idea that came to them? Oh, thank you.
Well, I remember what it was like being a freshman at Hope back in the fall of '70, having come from Japan, where I grew up. And so, even though I had gone to an American high school, I really didn't know the cultural norms at Hope. Didn't know, what you did for a date, for example. It didn't take me too long to realize that we were far advanced in Japan than they were here in Holland, Michigan. But yeah, it was nerve-wracking.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anybody else?
I'm remembering how you look around to find out who you can trust.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. You guys are jumping right to the heart of it, being a student. I was thinking of something a little more recent. I love though that you're going right there, right? Like trying to figure out who the people are, trying to figure out the ways, the rhythms, the norms, what are the accepted kind of ways of knowing, doing, and behaving that are central in finding our way. A recent story of my own, my youngest son, I'm attached here to the microphone for the hearing loop, which I've come to value more than I ever have before. My youngest son is 5. He just started kindergarten, and we knew he was loud. And we knew that he kind of had we thought he just kind of tendencies. Every once in a while, he'd go, "What'd you say?" And he would turn his head a little bit. But he always said it with a smirk on his face. We kind of thought he was giving us a hard time. We knew that anytime we talked about ice cream, even if he was in a different room, he could hear us. So we kind of had some clues and wondered, like, is he hard of hearing? And then other times we said, no, he can hear just fine because that boy can hear ice cream from a mile away, right? And then we got his hearing tested for kindergarten, and we turned out that he is nearly deaf in his left ear, right? And we had a hearing test done earlier, and it came back clear, and then this one came back, and it was evident that he's not been hearing out of his left ear his entire life. And we learned things about him, like when he watches TV and he's laying on the couch, we never noticed that most of us might just lay flat. He kind of keeps his ear tilted up a little bit, right? And so for me, one of the things that I've had to cross a path of in the last 6 months is figuring out the world of disabilities, figuring out the world of accessibility for my son, right? And wanting him to know what it looks like to experience school in a way that can bring him pleasure and joy and excitement, and wanting him to get off to a good start as an entering kindergartner, not one who can't hear and is frustrated or reprimanded perhaps for not listening, right? And so again, these ideas of experiencing something new, whether it's life as a student or life as something new, can help us to understand what it's like to be a first generation college student. The idea is that we're all first timers at something. And so when we talk about first gen students, we're not talking about an unfamiliar concept. That was my goal in sharing this reflection, please.
So Anne writes from online, I moved
thank
to
you.
a senior housing development. Everything is new, people,
Yeah.
routines, etc. Sometimes I'm lonely.
Yeah. Yeah. This must be a very relatable concept, right? Being in a new environment that changes all of the norms and rhythms and patterns. Thank you, Anne, for sharing that, for trusting us with that. I think related to that is that being first gen touches every facet of the student's life where they are. It touches their relationships, it touches their rhythms, their patterns, where they eat, what they eat, with whom they eat, where they study, what they study, with whom they study. Apply any adjective to that, and it could describe first gen experience. So who are we talking about when we're talking about first generation college students? We are speaking about students whose parents did not complete a 4-year degree. That's how the federal government defines being a first generation college student. It's also how Hope College defines being a first generation college student. The definition is important because when we understand who we're talking about, we are able to specify our attention to that group in order to identify patterns in their behaviors and outcomes. And we're then able to better understand how we might include and incorporate them into the college experience to better maximize their success. Again, I'm going to jump back to this idea that the more people that are able to meaningfully participate in higher education, that's just beneficial for us as a society. It's not to say that it's the only way, but it is a beneficial way that we can enhance society around us. So the more people that we can include, the more successful they'll be. A couple of other factors that I think are important are being mindful that there are different definitions out there. There are institutions who might use alternative definitions. So you might see something different in other places, such as students who have had any parents with any experience in higher education, or perhaps parents who have a 2-year degree. The other thing too that might affect a student's experience is timing. So my nephews will not be first generation college students should they decide to attend college, but my brother is finishing his degree right now and he's at 42. Right? And so he right now is finishing his degree, but he did not take a traditional path through emerging right from high school into a college setting. And so my nephews, when they enroll, while their dad will have some context for them, certainly academically, in terms of the larger social setting, the dating scene, looking around to see who you can trust, that's going to feel a little bit different for them, right? The other piece is sometimes context matters as well. And so while some people might not have parents who've gone through, perhaps they have an older sibling or two who then kind of serves as the de facto source of wisdom and guidance in their lives. So there's different circumstances that people might be experiencing. All right. I want to walk us through a little bit about how we arrived where we are today. So any guesses at what the original purpose, or anybody know what the original purpose of Richard will.
It was to educate preachers.
To train clergy. Nailed it. The original purpose of higher education in the American colonies was to educate clergy, develop a class of clergy, also for law and medicine. So really, we think originally for civic life, for faith life, and then for medical well-being, health and well-being as well. The earliest colleges were designed based off of the British classical education system. Right? So again, that attachment to the liberal arts is a concept coming there. Some of these earliest colleges were Harvard, William and Mary, Yale, Princeton, Queens College, now Rutgers. I think Rutgers, which is very near to Princeton, I heard they have a clever kind of advertising campaign that just says we were here first. Columbia, Penn. And then some of these students, though, to get professional training would return back to Europe, and they would often get professional educational training in Britain, and then return back to the colonies, right? So they would further their education and then return back to the colonies. However, some of them would return to Europe, and the intellectual kind of brain or heart of the Western world at this time was in Germany. Right? We often have a very, at least in the States, an American-centric kind of view of intellectual and industrial view of the world, but actually, and a lot of that comes through kind of post-war information, but really up until World War II, the intellectual heart of the world and the industrial heart of the world kind of got its life source from Germany and from German culture. And a lot of our undergraduate students would leave from these colonial colleges, and not only would they go to Britain, but some of them would also go to Germany, where they would participate in this kind of newer model of education based on experimentation and empirical study. Where we get the concept of PhDs and doctoral programs. These students would go and earn higher degrees that way. And then they also came back to the States, and they believed deeply in this form of education. And they started colleges here like Cornell, Stanford, Johns Hopkins, University of Chicago, institutions of the like. And they also made reforms at some of the other colleges. I promise you, I'm telling you all of this for a reason. When we think about today's college experience, it's largely rooted in institutions that were founded and models of education that were founded first in the 13th century and then in the 17th and 18th centuries. It's kind of funny that we still see some of that imagery today, right? I've wondered before, why are they wearing robes and pointy hats? We have these pointy-headed academics, right? But it came out of this British classical education model where one professor, right, like one expert would have this flock of students under their tutelage, and it would be cold, and they would wear these large cloaks or robes to keep themselves warm as they taught. So this is even where some of the imagery that we see associated with education today comes from. But there were others who were missing in this, right? There were other people who were involved in the faith life of a nation, right? We have other members of the population. There are women, there are people of color, and there are middle class and poor folks as well. I didn't mention this if I jump back a slide. This was largely a homogenous and elite group as well. To access higher education at that time, you had to be a man, you had to be white, and you often had to be wealthy, right? So pretty select group of the population. And so other folks desiring education as well created their own institutions of higher learning. This is where we begin to see expansion and access. So this idea of democratizing education, which is again at the heart of what we're talking about today, began to take root. We saw women's colleges, the Seven Sisters as they're called, started in the Northeast in the 19th century. You have Mount Holyoke, Bryn Mawr, Wellesley, Barnard, Smith. Those are the 5 of them that are still remaining. Radcliffe has been absorbed into Harvard, and Vassar is now co-ed. So we have the 7 sisters that came out of the Northeast. Following Reconstruction, you saw HBCUs, or historically Black colleges and universities, to educate recently freed enslaved people, freed from bondage, and now having access to education. However, not having institutions that accepted them, they began to start their own institutions. These were funded in part by wealthy white Northern benefactors and also denominations, largely from the North. I think some important conversation around that, that's not the focus of this conversation, though, is generosity and justice. Yes, also some element of influence and control and a desire to maintain that as part of the conversation too. And then heading into the 19th century, we begin to see land grant acts come about. These land grant acts are following the Civil War as well, right? We have a nation that is fractured, that needs healing. There's westward expansion. The second industrial revolution is hitting the scene, and we have a growing population that needs to eat. And so we begin to see institutions crop up across the country that are focused on teaching, that are emphasizing engineering, they're emphasizing agriculture and technology. So we see our A&Ms, our agricultural and mechanical schools, agriculture and technology schools begin to crop up. And so one of the things that's happening here too is we're seeing a movement to not only democratize access to education, but also to democratize what education is for. And education becomes not simply for training the professional elite and life and civic leaders of the country, but also to begin training industrial leaders as well, and educators as well, right? So that becomes a little bit more centered in what education is being used for too. And then we have the GI Bill, and the GI Bill comes following the Second World War. And this was where the middle class access to higher education really exploded, returning veterans having access to education as well. I think it's important to note, though, that even as access expanded, inclusion didn't necessarily expand at the same rate. And so our systems, and this is what I was mentioning earlier, our systems were largely still modeled on these early British and European models. And the assumption is that one kind of student would show up, an intelligent, bright, savvy, humble, curious student would show up and come under the tutelage of an expert faculty who would then train them in whatever the topic was, right, through research or guidance within the system of undergraduate research that might then eventually lead to graduate level research or preparing them to go out right into the industrial field directly from their undergrad. The same could be said for those working in the humanities, right, as well, that they might come under the tutelage of a faculty member who would then train them in writing and reading and scholarly work in that area as well. One of the challenges, though, is that as we expanded, students are bringing different life experiences to the environment too. And so how is it possible for somebody to come under the tutelage of a professor in that way when perhaps they have other competing life demands? They don't have time to participate in the research or to come under the mentorship, or perhaps they have different long-term goals. And so we realize that there's a need not only to include expansion and access, but to expand access toward attainment, right? So we begin to see inclusion take shape. This comes from acts that were largely led by Lyndon B. Johnson, the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, followed by the Higher Education Act of 1965. These two acts are huge for understanding the way that higher education works today. This was Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty. And for him, if you were to look into this, one of the things that you realize that are kind of his motive coming for this is these were born out of economic and civic logic, right? When more people succeed, the nation thrives. When more people are able to contribute to the industry of the nation is likely to thrive. When more people are able to have social mobility, the nation is likely to thrive. A thriving middle class, especially following the explosion of, the GI Bill leading more people to have access to the middle class. A thriving middle class became evident as part of our nation's success, and he wanted more people to have access to it as part of the war on poverty. And so access and attainment became central as well. If you've heard of TRIO programs, student support services, talent search, there's one other that kind of make up what TRIO means. I forget what the third one is off the top of my head. We also have programs like Upward Bound that come in, equipping high school students who don't have a family history of higher education to prepare them for accessing and understanding what's expected at the higher educational level. And then we begin to see federal student aid programs too, right? So this is where we see low interest student loans. We begin to see grants coming from the federal government. And so for a long time, the federal investment into higher education was viewed as part of the long-term, a long-term initiative for national success. I was going to say one other thing about this. I think the big point here, and so this is where we really begin to hone in on what it is to be a first generation student, is we were seeing from Lyndon B. Johnson and from these acts that forced students to have access to education. It couldn't just be about access, but it had to shift from, it had to also shift to include policy. If you look at our nation's history of inclusion, it typically follows policy, right? So we saw declines in racist attitudes and beliefs following the passing of the Civil Rights Act, right? We saw attitudes of inclusive and behaviors of inclusive excellence within higher education following these acts that were passed, right? And so, sorry, I'm moving. So what also became important is for the policy to reflect the people as well. Speaking of the people, about 1 in 3 undergraduate students in the United States identify as a first-generation college student. But 1 in 3, it's a lot. It's right around 5 million people. At Hope College, that number is about 20%. Right? You have to understand too, some of these students are attending all types of institutions, right? Community colleges, your 4-year public institutions, your 4-year private institutions. And so given the profile of Hope College, it's not surprising that our first generation student population is lower, right, than some other places, given a variety of factors. But that's what we're working with. And there's a lot that unites this group. I think I was going to show a video, but I don't think I need to. There's 2 narratives that I want to highlight, and they come from 2 students at Kansas State University that I think are just helpful anecdotes for understanding the different experiences. One is a young lady who graduated high school, always knew that she wanted to attend an institution of higher learning. Her mom came from a home, and she grew up in they called it the Orange County of Kansas. And it was a wealthy, upper middle class, wealthy suburb, I believe, of Kansas City. And her mom grew up in an environment that was just unstable and volatile. And she, as a result of that, has been operating largely with a 2nd grade reading level throughout her entire adult life, right? And so, and her dad just didn't take high school too seriously and was heavily discouraged from attending college. However, they through a variety of circumstances, were able to have a very successful economic life as a family. This young lady then, she knew her entire life that she wanted to go to college, but she arrived and she was well equipped economically to survive there, to thrive there. But upon her arrival to college, she realized, man, so many of my classmates at K-State know what it means to be a K-Stater. They knew the fight song. They knew the dance, the motions to do during the fight song. They knew the traditions. They knew where to go. They had restaurants that they were looking forward to eating at. And these might seem small, but they're markers of belonging and of connection. Another student graduated high school, and he was the first in his family. He was not only a first-generation college student, he was a first-generation American. And he was really excited to go to college. He had a scholarship, so economic barriers for him also weren't a variable. But upon arriving, he knew his parents loved and cared about him and were eager to be supportive of his success, but they didn't know how to do that, right? So they were emotionally supportive, but they didn't really know the demands of college life. And he was adapting to trying to still be the oldest son, meeting family needs back home. And his family was calling upon him for those needs. But he didn't quite have the tools to tell them, hey, if you want me to do this thing, I can no longer prioritize both of them, right? And thankfully for him, he had a mentor who really took him under his wing and helped guide him. And he was able to find a rhythm and a balance for caring for his family, holding that value of care highly, while also holding this value of caring for his institutional life at the college highly as well. And those are just two students that come to mind. I'm going to skip over this. That I think illustrate the first generation college student experience well. And these students illustrate the reality that there are a variety of challenges and strengths that come along with being a student. Being any student, but especially a first-generation student. Some of these challenges that they face is they're navigating unfamiliar systems and expectations. Again, I mentioned earlier that there's this set of unstated norms and expectations for how we navigate our institutional and systemic lives around society. Higher education is no different. And when those norms and expectations are based on a set of values that are different than what you've typically experienced, if nobody tells you, if they're left unexplained, you don't know how to navigate them, right? So the issue isn't that the expectations are there. The issue is that they're left unexplained. When I was a freshman at Central Michigan University, I was in English 105, our introductory to rhetoric class, and I had Nick Sushka. She was my first ever English professor, and she assigned us a reading assignment. And I came to class the next day, having completed the assignment, and I was aware of what was in it. And I thought that we were going to maybe talk about what was in it. And Nick said, she didn't ask us to recall. She asked us to respond. So she asked me she asked our class, what did you guys think of the reading? And I couldn't help but think to myself, why do you care what I thought about the reading? Like, you're the expert here. Like, you tell me what you thought about the reading, right? And in that moment, I realized that there were different expectations for learning in this environment than that came from my own undergraduate or my own high school experience. I grew up in White Cloud, Michigan. One stoplight, one high school, largely poor, working class, rural community, about an hour and a half north of Holland. And I, in my graduate program, read a seminal piece of literature by Jean Anyon. Dr. Anyon wrote this piece that she ended up titling The Hidden Curriculum, where she studied three high schools in New Jersey, comparing the different learning experiences and expectations and relationships with academic authorities that students experience across different social classes. She studied a poor working class high school, a middle class high school, and then a wealthy or upper class high school. In this upper class high schools, these students were encouraged to think critically, to interact meaningfully with complex ideas, and they were rewarded for it. The middle class high school was largely done the same, but with slightly fewer opportunities to access those types of experiences. The poor and working class high school, not only were they actively discouraged from thinking complexly, with complexity, and with critical thinking, they were often treated punitively for doing so. To ask why was a threat to authority. And so I grew up in an environment that in some ways mirrored that. And I showed up and she asked me what I thought. And I thought to myself, I'm not telling you what I think, right? Like this is new. And so having the system explain is really important. Feeling like an outsider. We've heard a little bit about that. This concept of belonging is really important. We each internalize statements of what it means to have root and place and meaningfulness to a place. Some of us have different levels of resilience to that than others, but by and large, that's a human experience. And we have psychological responses to our social environment that really impact our behavior. The next is balancing external demands. I spoke a little bit about the first generation student from the narrative earlier of the student who was trying to balance what does it look like to care for my family and to also meet the need to. We also know that first generation students, not always, but sometimes, have higher levels of economic need that face them as well, financial need. And so there's all of these external demands too. It's important that we address these, but it's also important that we acknowledge the strengths of the student, because the reality is that our first generation students are coming with an important set of strengths. And the reason that I mention this is if we can find a way to address the challenges while also leveraging the strengths, I think that is my belief on where our avenue to success lies. And so these students are often builders, connectors, and problem solvers. They often come out of life experiences that have celebrated ingenuity and being resourceful, having a level of autonomy and drive to be able to do that. people who know how to kind of find their way out of no way. They have a level of wit. They're often driven with purpose and motivation, right? Sometimes they are setting a new legacy and directory for their family, and that's also really important. And then they often have life experiences that have cultivated a level of resilience and adaptability too. And so if we can find a way to maximize these for students, that's where success lies. So awareness really is the first step toward inclusion. So that's the reason that I bring these up. And for me, the question isn't how do we fix students? For me, the question isn't how do we help a student to feel less like an outsider? The question is instead, how do we leverage the student's strengths to help them to succeed in that environment? I think there are 3 examples that we can look at for doing that. The first is through individual support. The second is through looking at the way that our systems are organized. And then the third is through institutional support as well. This is just a 5-minute clip from the video at the end of it that shows, I think, a great example of what individual support looks like. So a moment ago, I was going to show the narrative of the 2 students. And I opted out of that, and I would like to show you this 5 minutes from this documentary that just shows, I think, individually what it looks like to show up for students.
I would say to the professors who know they have first generation students to intentionally reach out to them. Because it's already intimidating for a student to be on a college campus with a professor who has years of experience in front of them. And even when they need help, sometimes we don't feel like we can approach them. I think it's important for them to know who those first generation students are and to intentionally go to them and say, if you need help, come to me.
My advice to other teachers or professors that have first generation students is that they need to see each student as an individual. Each student is there and each student is different. They have different needs. So I always try to think of my son when I have a student in front of me. So if we individualize and say, okay, this is my son, how would I want somebody to treat my son?
Befriend them in a sense, but you find out what makes them tick. You know, where are you coming from? You know, wow, find a little bit about, you know, their background, their culture, and maybe try to help them assimilate a little more.
I think it's really important that first generation college students come to the university campus and get connected through mentors, whether it be a peer mentor or a faculty mentor. They can help the student to become more comfortable with navigating their surroundings, and they're just a social support.
I got to reach out and find some people who've been through the experience, because that kind of firsthand knowledge is almost impossible to acquire in any other way.
Being as immersed and connected on campus as you possibly can increases your opportunities for success exponentially. The research says that if you are plugged in and well connected on campus through mentorship programs or campus jobs, that your odds of success increase significantly because you're immersed in the environment.
It's critically important that we give students permission to ask for help.
We're dealing with a large number of students that are in the exact same place. So there's no question that's silly. There's no question that is not relevant. And there's no question that doesn't have a legitimate answer that can be found.
I think we have to be there in an accessible, responsive way. It could be that faculty advisor. It could be that faculty member. It could be a religious minister or rabbi or priest in our community. It could be an employer, on-campus employer.
Authentic voice is one of the most powerful teaching tools that we have. And being able to support and nurture first generation students that will go out and then support and nurture high school students, middle school students, even elementary students, and plant that seed. I know you can do this, and I did, and let me tell you about my walk. That makes that impact so powerful.
The nation and the world needs these folks to be successful because they have perspective and strengths that they bring to the university experience and that they will bring to professions and to their careers and lives, which are really in demand these days. We need them to bring their critical thinking to the great problems we face. We need them to persevere so they can acquire enough power to make a difference in our society where it's needed.
Even though it's big and it may seem big, there is a place for them here. Everyone can find their place here. And if I can do it, anybody can do it. I truly believe that.
My name is Helen Nguyen, Lisa Mee,
Chris Bailey.
Jessica Leiter, Sierra Kathy.
Martin Segovia.
Hello, my name is Chuck Allen.
Angelica Villanueva.
I'm Amanda Morales.
Dr. Dina Bennett.
Stephen Dandino.
Dr. Pat Bosco.
Debbie Mercer.
Athletic Director and Associate Principal at Garden City High School.
I'm the founder and director of the Urban Scholastic Center.
A physical earth science teacher here at Garden City High School.
Assistant professor and diversity coordinator for the College of Education.
I'm the assistant director of the McNair Scholars Program at K-State.
I'm the vice provost for undergraduate studies.
Vice President, Dean at Kansas State University.
And I serve as Dean of the College of Education.
And I am a first generation.
First generation.
And I'm a first generation student.
So my hope in that is that it gives a little bit of a glimpse in kind of the benefit of individual support, right? It shows how and the importance and merit of having people show up individually. But oh, yes. Let's see. How do I get that presentation mode? There. I feel like I should know how to do this. Got it. Except I don't know how to get rid of that. Thanks. Thanks. I don't want to make any assumptions, but I think I'm the youngest person in the room. And it's funny because I'm standing here and I'm giving this presentation about being first gen and the importance and value of helping people to know that they belong. And the reality is sometimes we don't know what we're doing and we feel like we should know what we're doing based simply on the fact that we're in a space that we hold a subset of identities, right? And in my head, I'm thinking to myself, I should know how to do this. And I didn't. So thank you, Amy, for your help. She's back out there. But okay, so when we think about supporting first generation students, I think that video just did a really beautiful job of demonstrating the importance of and what it looks like to provide individual support. There's also the importance of systemic support, right? And incorporating this into the systems of higher learning. And we saw that a little bit earlier with the Higher Education Act. I'm forgetting the other act that was on my slide a moment ago. And the Economic Opportunity Act. So we see the value of systems and when we incorporate these into our laws and policies, but also the merit of individual support. And then two, we can hopefully begin to see what institutional support looks like as well. And so we have upward bound programs that exist. We have bridge programs. These are programs, foundational programs that can be incorporated into any institution. A bridge and upward bound, again, trains and prepares high school students for college level learning and for the college experience. Bridge programs are a style of program that literally serves as a bridge from secondary education to higher education, right? I like to highlight, these aren't, I'm making up a word here, these aren't remedial, but they're intermedial, right? It's not necessarily that students require fixing, but it does sometimes require an intermediary, right? It does sometimes benefit, the students and the institution sometimes benefit from an intermediary who can help one another to understand the other, right? So I like to describe bridge programs as being that intermediary. The other things that we can institutionalize are belonging and connection. So these can be campus organizations, mentorship. We saw that through the video that was just shared. and visibility campaigns, right? So creating physical community and space in connection with other students is central to developing, it's correlated directly with a sense of pride and a sense of hopefulness. And those two things are directly tied to success in college. And so it's not simply about coddling people or, giving them it's not about saying they should pull themselves up from the bootstraps versus coddling, but rather it's saying, hey, what are the things that are associated with success really in any environment? And not necessarily thinking of higher education as different from any environment. I think of the communities that I've been a part of where I've flourished the most, whether it be church or school or other communities. I've had people who come alongside of me who knew more than I did. I've had peers who meant a great deal to me. And I've had people who I could relate to that made themselves known, right? So this visibility campaign is that element of this. I hope I have on my bulletin board a sticker that just says I'm first, right? And it lets students know that I also am a first generation college student. There's this thing that happens when you're a first generation student. You think everybody who works there comes from this long line and legacy of people who've held higher degrees, and students are shocked, right? When they find out that I'm first gen, they kind of like, there's always this moment of you were? And I don't think it's because I'm that exceptional. I think it's simply because the messages that we tell ourselves. And then academic and financial support, learning community. So again, that sense of connection, that sense of pride, that sense of meaningful relationship with others, transparent pedagogy. Marianne Winklemas, I believe she comes out of San Jose State University. She's got really wonderful research about the importance of transparency in learning and teaching. And then micro grants as well. I mentioned earlier the social class differences that sometimes students, first generation students, are more likely to come from poor and working class environments. And so the reality is sometimes there's needs that we have. We think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Those foundational needs, physical needs, security, safety. Hard to think about class if you don't have winter boots and it's the middle of February. Hard to think about class if you haven't eaten in a couple of days. Difficult to think about doing your homework or to prioritize doing your homework if you don't have your books, right? And so sometimes these micro grants can come in and really help students out as well. At Hope College, this is some of the ways that this looks for our students. There's first, I want to just talk about universal design, because that centers some things that aren't necessarily coming out of my office or related directly to first generation students, but rather they are initiatives that are based in this concept that what benefits any student should likely benefit almost all of them, right? Are you all familiar with OXO kitchen utensils? Have you heard the story of how they were created? So they're known for having kind of a soft grip, right? OXO kitchen utensils were designed by an engineer whose wife was developing arthritis that was making it difficult for her to cook and to prepare meals, which was a deeply important part of her identity. And so this engineer, this man and his son designed a soft grip handle for kitchen utensils. And then they marketed it and sold it for a lot of money. But it turns out that not only people with arthritis like a soft grip handle for the kitchen, right? And that there are a lot of people who enjoy cooking with those utensils, including folks who physically benefit from access to cooking that otherwise might not have been able to continue doing so. But also people who just enjoy something that's a little bit more comfortable, right? And so universal design, if we think about that in the educational setting, is the same idea. Any student likes a little bit of ownership and control over what they have the opportunity to cook and to prepare for themselves. It's often a time where perhaps you don't have as much agency over a core part of your life that you might have liked to have had. We could have an argument of, is that spoiling students? Do they really need access to the care pantry if they're not food insecure? Maybe. Is it there primarily because our students who are food insecure need access to food? Yeah, it absolutely is. But also, We want to make sure that all of our students have the opportunity to have some agency over their lives, including the meals that we cook. And so we don't exclude anybody from this. Cold weather attire. This is something that we do that I'm really proud of. Richard could probably tell us when this started, but collecting donations in the generosity of grants and community members to fund newly purchased winter weather gear for our students so that they can wear things when it is cold that they are proud of. You have a student that I have this year from Texas. They're excited about winter, and also they are mortified about winter, but they don't have everything that they need, right? And so I know it's cold and the first frost is hitting, and reassuring them that this is going to open up next week and that they're going to have what they need, right? And that they'll be able to go and choose something that they're proud of. Earlier, I mentioned transparency in teaching and learning. We have a Center for Teaching and Learning at Hope. I just participated in a book group last week that was speaking to how do we prepare for underprepared students. Those students who might possess a number of strengths, but who simply aren't aware either of how to navigate the system or perhaps who do need a little bit of extra assistance. And how can we ready ourselves? And although my primary role is not instructional, I do a little bit of instruction, but my hope was to attend to that to better understand the faculty perspective so that I could incorporate some of their perspectives into the student experience, the co-curricular experience as well. Foundational programs at Hope. I don't work directly with the Upward Bound program, but that is one that's been around for decades. That's really important for the work that we're doing in the community and at the college. We have newly formed kind of this year. We have an assistant director for first generation student success, the first time in Hope's history. I have the opportunity to supervise their work. And they also direct the summer bridge program, right? So we see these foundational programs within Hope College that are central to what we're forming and shaping. Several years ago, speaking to belonging and connection, 1Gen, or the first generation student union, was created. The student group of people who have affinity with one another. They can relate to each other. They can connect with one another, have some level of comfort and familiarity with people who might have a shared experience. It's not about kind of segregating off, but rather it's about, oh, boy, this is a place where I can breathe without having to provide context. Then I can go back out there and meet and get to know people who are different than me, who have new ideas too, but sometimes it's nice just to have an oasis and to breathe for a second. The I'm First campaign, I spoke to the sticker that's in my office a little bit earlier. National First Generation Student Week is next week, this coming week from November 3rd to the 8th. November 8th is National First Generation Day. Thursday, the 6th, we'll have a first generation student celebration. We invite our friends from Upward Bound, and we have high school students who sit and have a celebratory meal as they prepare to go to college next year with our first generation students on campus. Some of them participated in Upward Bound, so it's really this beautiful moment of mentorship and visibility where they see one another. And then mentorship, not only peer mentorship, but also amongst faculty, staff, and students. My coordinator of, our college's first generation student success coordinator and assistant director, they spend so much time being with students and helping them to just learn the way, but also validating them and celebrating them. And then academic and financial support. We have a first generation advisory board. They focus on awareness and training and preparing the college for these students. And so that could range from simply letting people know that first generation students exist, that these resources exist, and then other times helping people from resident assistants to faculty to coaches to understand the experiences of first gen students. Yes.
So Robert is concerned about student loan defaults. And does the argument that it makes sense for students to take on student loans, could this negatively impact the standard of living going forward? And is the return on investment worth it for many students?
Could you read that one more time for me?
Does it make sense for students to take on student loans? Could this negatively impact the standard of living going forward? And is the return on investment worth it for many students?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. It's not one that's completely, it's it's not completely within the scope of this presentation, but it is directly related to it. I started this presentation by saying access to and inclusion in higher education is directly connected to concepts of success and national success, right? And so it does relate. If people are coming out of this burdened by debt, that's really important to think about. I don't think there's any doubt that the funding model, and this you could hear President Muskegon speak at length about this, that the funding model of higher education is broken, right? And that access, and when I mean access, I don't mean just access to, but the ability to access it and not to be weighed down by it on the back end is also therefore broken. I think I would need to gather my thoughts before I try to speak my way to a clear idea, but I think what I'm going to do is say I don't know that I have a solution, but I'm holding two paradoxes in mind at the same time. And one of them is, yes, the model is broken and it needs a remedy because access to higher education is historically relevant and important for our for social mobility, for a thriving middle class, and for ingenuity and civic responsibility. I believe that those things have historically been more often true than not as it relates to higher education in the United States. And it needs to be fixed for that reason. So I don't have a solution for it. I'm always a little bit reluctant, and my guard goes up when questions of access to higher education come up. And this isn't wanting to make any, I would want to be curious with Robert, but I think more often than not, and this isn't projecting anything or making any claims about that statement or question, but more often than not, in my experience, when people talk about access to higher education, I kind of wonder access for whom, right? Like who, is it worth it for, I don't know if I'm being clear right now. I worry that the people who would be left out are people who have historically been marginalized in the context of the United States as well. And by that specifically, I mean people who are poor or working class and people of color, right? Like those are groups who've historically been excluded from institutions of higher learning across the scope of our nation's history. And I fear that when we begin talking about access, that there's a little bit of I worry about who would be the first to go. Because the people to stay would be those who could continue to afford it. And those would be the wealthiest amongst us. And then there's also direct correlations to other subcategories of populations there too. So those are some things that I always kind of worry about. Yeah.
Are there any studies on success rate of first-gen students versus other students in the long run? Like, are they generally more motivated, end up doing much better in the long run, or are they about average with everybody else? Or do they fall behind because of historical reasons that you just mentioned?
Post-grad or within the institution?
No, in the long run of life.
Yeah. There are. It's funny, I was kind of reviewing the literature review that I did in preparation for this yesterday. And I looked at one of my references about almost exactly that topic. And I didn't read it. I ran out of, I had to prioritize some other things. So I wish I would have, but there is research on the relationship between long-term success. There's some interesting research on the relationship between working class first generation white males and affluent continuing generation white males and their long-term success as well. One of the things that we're looking at there is social capital, right? Who do you know is almost as important as what you know, right? And so there are, and that's one of the variables that comes to mind. I'll use even my own story as an example. I was a first generation student. I'm squarely middle class. I'm perhaps upper middle class. And we have a family friend who's a sophomore at Michigan State. My wife is in HR, corporate HR at a local, at Hayworth locally here. And this family friend of ours is moving through Michigan State and is really curious about employment law or human resources, perhaps both. And Abby, my wife, said to me, like, oh man, how cool would it be if we could host, I'm forgetting her name, if we could host our friend this summer, and if I was able to find an internship opportunity for her at Hayward. I thought, man, that would be amazing, right? Like, what a really great experience for her. My wife is far smarter than I am, and really wonderful and lovely at her job, and loves mentoring people. And then it also crossed my mind, how many of our students, perhaps from a similar background in a lot of ways, but not all the ways, just simply don't have access to that, right? Because they don't know somebody who works in HR at a large reputable corporation. So some of that is true. Yeah.
You've spoken frequently about the middle class, even referring to yourself as middle or upper, which I would imagine many of us would identify with.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, however, I haven't read extensively, but some of what I've read suggests that the middle class is eroding.
Mhm.
And so you're having, stratified upper class, lower class, even though that term may be laden, a lot of baggage.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about that in terms of higher education and the impact that it's going to have? I mean, my dad was a first generation student here, right out of Second World War because of the GI Bill.
Right.
So, I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I think it's of concern. I'll be honest, I was driving in this morning and I believe, like, I'm so convicted and compelled by the values that I've talked about today. And I believe deeply in them. And also I'm worried about their ability to be actualized, right? When I see the increased stratification, shrinking middle class, and really a shrinking upper class as well, increasingly condensed, and a growing poor and working class. The ability for students to access this, I believe in it. And there's also other reasons that I'm concerned about it that aren't the focus of this conversation. That would probably require another 90 minutes, but yeah, I think that's an important, particularly as the rate of inflation in terms of cost of education far exceeds the rate of earning inflation. My aunt, so I was one of those students who I was first generation. My aunt graduated from college, and we were speaking after I graduated, and I was talking to her about my level of student loan debt that I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to pay off. And she was talking about her level of student loan debt. She finished a 4-year degree. She was largely able to cover the cost of her tuition by working over the summer. And when she graduated in the early 90s, at the time, my grandpa always said she got a job in computers. She got a job working as a computer programmer at a near 6-figure salary in the early mid-90s, which was really wonderful wage. And still is wonderful wage. And she graduated with $1,500 in student loan debt, $1,500. That's hard to do. You would have it's incredibly difficult to do that right now, even if you work. Right, I have a student right now who's trying to work full time while being a full-time student, so that they can save enough money this year to have what they would describe as a full undergraduate student experience their next 3 years. I'm just going to work and try to save, but it's really difficult to do. I think you're spot on. Yeah.
To your point, 4 years here at Hope.
Yeah.
3 years with Western Theological Seminary, total
Yep.
student debt of $800.
Yep. Yeah.
Huge difference.
Huge difference.
And a kid from my church, I went to Heidelberg.
Yeah.
She graduated with $100,000
Yeah.
of student debt.
Yeah. I'm not an expert on the economy. What I will say is though, the other really difficult thing about this is I almost said, and that's a mortgage, but that's not a mortgage anymore either, right? Like housing, other expenses are going up as well. So last thing I want to mention about academic and financial support is also the incorporation of first generation student support within our Center for Calling and Career, our career center, the Borichter Center for Calling and Career at Hope. So having one of our career advisors who also serves as a liaison for first generation students, helping to support them too. This is a lot of numbers. Hope doesn't, I kind of want to end with this of just saying, talking about the importance of this. I'm really proud of the work that we're doing. I'm really proud of the outcomes that we're having. The national average for college student retention typically ranges between 75 and 77% at a four-year institution. At Hope College, we are routinely close to 90. And that is not only exceptional compared to the national average, but it's also exceptional compared to many of our peer profile institutions. I'm incredibly proud of our students and the work that they put in. I'm incredibly proud of my colleagues who work hard to create an environment that helps these students to succeed. And that's each of our students. Our first generation students consistently are retained at a lower degree, but still a much higher degree than the national average. The rate at which the differential rate between our overall student body and our first generation student body retention tends to mirror the differential rate nationally as well, right? And so I think for me, that's where the challenge lies, is we're doing a better job than average, but we're still not doing as good of a job with those students. And so I'm excited to see some of the work, some of the changes that have been more recent that can help us with that. There's a number of reasons for that. I see your question. If you look at these, I was really interested to pause and note that during seasons of large, significant kind of national events, years of elections, that first generation student retention dipped. During COVID, they dipped. I don't know what correlation might be there. That was just kind of a curious musing, but really in 2020 and 2021, we saw two of our largest numbers, first generation student dips. So the largest gap certainly is 2021, where we see about a 14-point differential between those two groups. And I think that speaks to some of those external demands and ability to navigate. Yeah.
What does retained mean? They went to a different school or they just dropped out?
Thank you. Yeah, retention, retained, so is measured in 6 years. So students who complete their degree within a 6-year window, and it is at the institution with which they started. And that, I don't always love that. Students leave for a lot of reasons. We just might not be the best fit for somebody. That's just true. Or some of those external demands that do take priority, and we want to make sure that they can meet those, right? So, and sometimes though, it's because there's a shortcoming that we need to figure out how to remedy. But that's the information that I want to have for y'all. I want to first say thank you for giving me your time. I also want to invite questions, thoughts that you might have in this moment. And before I forget, I am very open to continuing the conversation. So my contact information, the door is open. My contact information is there. Feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to continue any conversations or interests that you have about first generation students or seeing first generation students at Hope College be successful.
I'm trying to find the words for my question, but basically you actually do this work and you actually do it here. So how do you balance helping people learn the institutional culture and fit in and assimilate versus encouraging people to be their authentic selves, to take the buzz phrase, not sacrifice that and bring that diversity to the university and bring the coherence to their own being? I'm not sure I'm saying that very well, but
yeah,
you get my question?
Yeah, I think part of that question is, I think about this in the way that I raise my kids. Am I raising my kids for the world that I want to see, or am I raising my kids for the world as it is? And that doesn't necessarily have to, I think there can be a little bit of a false dichotomy in that. So I try to do both. It's funny, I removed this slide because I didn't think it flowed very well, but there is a scholar by the name of TJ Yasso, and Dr. Yasso introduced this concept of community cultural wealth. I actually have it right here. I took it off the slides last night. And I think there's the concept of cultural capital, which I talked about earlier, the commonly accepted ways of knowing, doing, and behaving at a place. And then there's community cultural wealth. And community cultural wealth tells us that there are a variety of ways of knowing, doing, and behaving. And if we create an openness within our organizations to those, or within our communities to those, that we actually are going to enhance our ability to understand and to learn and to develop new perspectives, to evolve and to grow. And so I really do try to balance that. The reality is institutions take a long time to change, systems take a long time to change. And while I have certain ways that I certainly would love for any place to grow or to evolve, including myself, reality is it's not going to happen overnight. And so I do want our students to be prepared for the world as it is, but I also don't want to lose themselves in the midst of that. And so we really do. I also put a significant emphasis on helping them to see their strengths and to validate those. And then also that awareness and training that we do on campus is trying to equip the campus community to see and to validate those strengths.
I was a first generation student, came from a working class family. I was a really good test taker, so I got this very prestigious scholarship from Michigan State and showed up there and was inducted into the honors college just based on my test scores. And the assumption there was, well, you're a smart kid. So, if you need something, you'll come tell us.
Yeah.
And, we'll just trust you to make your own decisions and be who you are. Boy, was that wrong.
Mm-hmm.
How do you at Hope deal with the fact that first generation students frequently have no idea what they need? They don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And are less likely than the other students to actually be bold enough to reach out and say, I'm lost here.
Yeah. That feeling like an outsider piece is really central here. The way that I said that for myself as a student is I just did not want them to find out that I didn't know what I was doing. And the idea of fake it till you make it is one that we see all too often, and that can be a significant disruption to success. So one, our bridge program, we try to normalize not knowing, and we try to normalize the pursuit of knowing and help-seeking skills. So we have, we call them the 4 C's that we want students to leave with. The first is confidence. Perceived self-efficacy is almost as important as actual self-efficacy. Believing that you can do the thing is almost as important as actually being able to do the thing. The second C is competence. We actually want them to be able to do it, right? To have the self-efficacy. The third is connections, right? So relationships. And then the fourth is curiosity. And that's where we try to really focus on help-seeking skills, acknowledging that you won't know, normalizing the fact that being here is an acknowledgement that we have things to learn, and that includes how to navigate the place and how to succeed in the place. So those are a couple of things that we do. Yeah, it's really difficult when you're at an organization that's its foundation is based on expertise. It can feel a little bit intimidating to not know what you're doing, right? You're surrounded by PhDs and scholars, even as a student. I should just know this, but the entire point is that you're here because you don't know. Yeah.
Keying off the point that was just made, when you look at this right column that students have, institutions, at least at the undergraduate level, value how well you score. And despite comments to the contrary of things on the right side, and I don't care if it's first or multi-generation later, you're valued on your GPA.
strongly. I've got 3 advanced degrees after college from 3 different institutions. And consistently at the undergraduate level, I would hear our grade point average for a 4-point, I'm sorry, a 3-point is worth a 4-point anywhere else, or a 2-point is worth a 3-point anywhere else. When I got into life, I went, why didn't I go somewhere else, for Pete's sake? Especially in the context of not only the strengths that students have in getting to know students, but then also to warn them or make them aware of what follows in adult land later when you don't know what you don't know. How do you incorporate those kind of building into students those realities?
You're speaking to how do we help students to, yeah, could you reframe that for me?
To know what comes ahead in the real world, vices the artificial world of college, and to also prepare them for expectations in the real world. It's not always going to be what they knew at hometown college USA.
Yeah.
It's rough and ruddy out there, and you're valued on different things than you are in college. You can succeed very well after college as an ordinary person.
Yeah.
Not a 4-point.
I think there are really important questions about that institutionally and within the system of higher ed. There's a lot of conversation right now around grade inflation. Really interesting article I read last week from the New York Times about grade inflation. Students at Harvard not reading because of competing demands in their lives, and they're prioritizing those competing demands and then showing up to class unprepared. Right. So really, really fascinating. And for a moment, no, never mind, I won't make that joke. But I think there's some really important conversations that are happening and that also need to be had at a greater level. So I think you're onto a really important topic there. I can speak individually when I refer back to, jump all the way back to the start. For me personally, these concepts, engaged pedagogy and embodied learning, I let my students know very early on that that doesn't mean group therapy, right? We're not simply talking about ideas and information simply so that we can feel better about it and then have easy assessment as it relates to it. Those are really more to do with the fact that information, we are teaching with the mindset that information is more than just content, but that it should help us to develop meaning and that it should help us to apply it in a relevant way. And my assessment of that is rigorous, and my expectation of their participation is high. And they know that from the start, and it's clear. And so for me personally, that's what that looks like. And my students know when they've dropped the ball. They know, but they also know when I've dropped the ball. And so I don't know if that directly answers your question, but for me personally, that's how I try to prepare them, because the world can be hard. And I don't want them to think that they like skating by is how it operates, right? Like that's simply not true. On the other hand, the world can be hard and harsh, and I don't think that I need to be hard and harsh to prepare them for that. I don't believe that we need to do it institutionally either. I believe that we can have compassionate and yet rigorous expectations. And because we're a place of learning, my philosophy around that is that there should be no better place to make a mistake. There should be no better place to learn from it. So we want to prepare them. So we want to have those expectations. And also, we're a place of learning, and so we're going to come back to that. I don't know if that answers your question, but hopefully.
Just one, and I think I missed it, the number of students actually that are first time at Hope going up, and I think I missed it. It was on maybe your last slide. And what percent is that of the student body? So it's one
of our first generation students?
Of your first generation?
We're approximately 20% first generation students.
And is that the last 10 years, you've seen it dramatically go up? Or
Um,
just going up gradually? And then my other question is, what is your 3-year aspiration for you with this program? What would you like to see embellished, added to, actualized in 3 years, if that was your goal?
Thanks for asking that. Namely, because yesterday I was driving home and I thought to myself, somebody might ask this question and I need to be prepared to answer it. These are pretty reflective. It's generally seen an uptake in first generation student enrollment over the last 10 years. And if that's a sign of inclusion and access, then I'm very grateful for that. But generally speaking, it's kind of, in my time at Hope, it's been between 15 and 20% of our students being first gen. So, for me, as it relates to first generation student success at Hope College, my kind of top goals and desires for the next few years would be to see the physical community built out, right? And so I would like to have a physical environment where those students can anticipate access to staff and anticipate connection with one another and engage with resources that are helpful and important to their success and have a sense of connection and belonging. I would also then like to see so not only the physical community, but then the kind of institutional readiness follow suit, right? So for me, the first point is connection and belonging. The second point is institutional readiness. And so ongoing training and development of our staff. And then the third would be I would say kind of academic readiness as well for our faculty to be just better prepared. That's not to say that they're ill-equipped. It's not a deficiency per se, but I would like to see them a little bit more ready.
So I'd like to say thank you to all of you who have joined, as well as to Casey for a wonderful presentation. I would encourage you to stay around if you have specific questions that you'd like to ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.